So let's start with chapter 1, which is Introduction to the course. The name of the course is the Structural Biology of Proteins. And when we say structural biology, we refer to a field in biology that studies the relationship between structure and function in macromolecules. And we'll see later why this relationship is so important. We need one to understand the other. So what are these macromolecules? As the name implies, these are very large molecules. They contain between thousands and millions of atoms, but they're also polymeric, which means that they are built from smaller building blocks, organic compounds, that are different in each type of macromolecule. And these building blocks attach to one another covalently by forming chemical bonds and form very long chains. The chains then fold in three-dimensional space into a compact structure, which has a certain biological activity. And finally, the macromolecules are also highly important in terms of function. They are crucial to the existence of all life forms, and they carry out the most central and key biological functions in all living organisms. Also, accordingly, their concentrations inside our cells are very high. So we have three types of such macromolecules. The first are proteins, which will be discussed throughout this course, and they have many different roles. Their building blocks are amino acids. Second, we have nucleic acids, which include DNA and RNA. DNA, you probably know, this is the molecule responsible for encoding the genetic information in all living organisms. And RNA, which is actually a group of molecules, is responsible primarily for expressing this genetic information encoded inside DNA. The building blocks of nucleic acids, both of DNA and RNA, are called nucleotides. Finally, we have carbohydrates, or complex sugars, which are made of smaller sugars called monosaccharides. And this type of macromolecules have also some important functions in living organisms. Some of them function as energy stores. For example, glycogen in animals and starch in plants. Others build larger structures, like cellulose, which is the most abundant organic molecule on Earth, and it builds the plant cell wall. Another carbohydrate, chitin, builds the exoskeleton of insects. And finally, certain carbohydrates are involved in molecular recognition. You can find them on the surfaces of cells bound to lipids or proteins, and they allow cells to recognize other cells and also other molecules. So the first type of macromolecules to be discovered were proteins, and it happened in the 19th century by several studies that aimed at demonstrating the chemical basis of life. Or in other words, that well-known processes in living organisms are actually chemical reactions. So what these studies did is to take known processes such as fermentation, which was known for thousands of years as the process that creates bread, wine, and beer, and showing that they're actually chemical reactions. In the case of fermentation, Louis Pasteur, which was one of the most prominent scientists in the 19th century, showed that fermentation is a chemical reaction converting sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide. Later, other scientists like Barthelot and Buchner, who studied fermentation, but also other processes found in living organisms, they showed that such chemical reactions can be accelerated or catalyzed by extracts, organic extracts taken from simple organisms like bacteria and yeasts. And they didn't know what these extracts were in terms of their chemical compositions, so they just named them zymases. And only later, it was found that zymases are actually proteins that act as catalysts or enzymes. And you can see the similarity between the word enzyme and zymase. So proteins were the first to be discovered, at least functionally, and it was found only later that proteins do not appear out of nowhere inside cells and tissues. They're actually the products of genes, and the genes are functional units inside DNA molecules. So this brought to the revelation of DNA and RNA as well. So today we recognize the importance of all macromolecules, but in this course we focus on proteins, and there are several reasons for that. The first one is that protein are the most abundant macromolecules in living organisms. Roughly 50% of the dry mass of the cell is made of proteins, and their number is about 4 times larger than the number of the genes coding for them. In fact, in a single cell, you can find up to 50,000 different proteins. But more importantly, we want to focus on proteins because they carry out most of the key processes in living organisms, which means that they are very functionally diverse. And here you can see a list of some of the most important functions of proteins, and in the following slides, we'll discuss some of them in detail. So we already mentioned that proteins acting as enzymes are involved in the catalysis of chemical reactions that are part of cellular metabolism. Some proteins mediate the production and transfer of energy inside cells. Others are involved in the expression of genes, the transport of ions and solutes across cellular membranes. This is, for example, what allows proteins to import foodstuff molecules and export waste products. Proteins are involved in the communication between cells, in molecular recognition processes, in defense mechanisms that allow living organisms to defend themselves or to protect themselves from pathogens like viruses and bacteria. And finally, some proteins form large structures inside and outside cells, which confer mechanical protection to the cell and also other important roles.